Pakistan is often solely blamed for the rise of terrorism in the region and beyond. But this reductionist narrative is both biased and misinformed. Pakistan, acting in good faith, aligned with the Free West led by the US against the Soviet bloc as early as in 1954, when it joined SEATO and the CENTO in 1955. Yet, the US and its allies treated Pakistan as a disposable partner, useful in war.
After all, Pakistan is a strong ally and a vibrant democracy. The United States supports the democracy and supports the sovereignty.
Abandoned in peace.
Pakistan must adopt a different approach. There's been an erosion in trust because we have witnessed terrorist organizations being given safe haven inside of Pakistan,
leaving it to absorb the blowback of extremism and terror. Founded as a peace and freedom-loving nation, Pakistan carried a progressive vision championed by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a London-educated barrister and statesman. But the fallout of Washington's geopolitical games transformed that vision. What was once a forward-looking society became a battleground for extremism.
Pakistan is today probably the #1 victim in the world of terrorism. In the last decade, 30,000 Pakistani civilians and 5,000 Pakistani soldiers have died in terrorist incidents. Pakistan has a mass casualty terrorist attack at least once a week.
In the Pak-US relationship, Pakistan's interests, even its security, stability and very existence, have always been secondary to America's shifting geopolitical priorities. Yet in times of crisis, the US returns to Pakistan, asking it to do more.
There's an uptick in the terrorism, not just against forces, but against the Afghan people. And in that regard, Pakistan does need to do more.
Henry Kissinger's words capture the essence of this tragic dynamic. It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal. The cost of this alliance has far outweighed the rewards. This isn't just history, it's a reckoning. This story of the genesis of terrorism in the region will be covered in 5 distinct eras. Pre-1979, newly decolonized Pakistan, a liberal and peaceful nation. 1979 to 1989, Soviets invade Afghanistan and Pakistan becomes America's frontline partner. 1990 to 2001, mission over, Pakistan goes in oblivion. 2001 to 2021, the tragic 9/11, and we're allies again. Key non-NATO ally in the war on terror. 2021 to 2025, US exits Afghanistan, Pakistan fades from Washington's view. After independence, Pakistan was a peaceful, stable, and development-focused nation. United and forward-looking, as envisioned by its founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Militancy and extremism were virtually unknown. Its urban centers, including Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad, exhibited vibrant cultural scenes with flourishing arts, literature, music, and cinema. During this period, Pakistan remained a favorite destination of hippies and international travelers alike who loved exploring Pakistan's metropolitan cities while being equally drawn to the northern areas, including Gilgit-Baltistan, Hunza Valley, and Skardu for their stunning natural beauty. The culture was open, warm and welcoming. Women actively participated in education, the workforce and public life. A land of religious and ethnic pluralism, Pakistan embraced diversity with no place for the word jihad in public discourse. After 3 decades of rapid progress and prosperity came the fateful year of 1979. In 1979, following Afghanistan's Soviet-backed SAW Red Revolution, US President Jimmy Carter authorized Operation Cyclone on July 3rd, launching CIA support for Afghan fighters with an initial $700,000.
To be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How? Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, he had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan.
Jimmy Carter issued a secret presidential finding shortly after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and he directed CIA to go ahead and use all means to help the Afghans resist.
Mission: turn Afghanistan into the Soviet Union's Vietnam. Thus, Pakistan was chosen as the strategic base for this covert war. Over $20 billion were funneled into arming and training the Mujahideen, making Operation Cyclone one of the longest and costliest covert operations in US history. Pakistan played a vital role, especially in intelligence and logistics. Despite over 400 Soviet airspace violations and attacks, while still reeling from the dismemberment of 1971, orchestrated by Pakistan's arch-enemy India. By the mid-80s, Pakistan had become a global transit hub for the Afghan Jihad. Thousands of volunteers from Muslim countries arrived to join the fight, and billions flowed from wealthy Muslim governments. By 1987, Pakistan was managing over $2 billion annually in arms and aid, what CIA Director William Casey called the largest covert operation in history. The inevitable outcome of this largest covert operation was the burgeoning of radicalization and religious fanaticism in the region. Owing to the continuous blows, in 1988, the Soviets withdrew, leaving President Najibullah's communist regime to collapse. On the other hand, the US and the West, having met their objective, quickly disengaged, leaving Pakistan alone. Left to deal with the fallout alone, Pakistan warned President George H.W. Bush that Western-backed militant groups had become a Frankenstein, a threat Pakistan might not be able to contain. But that warning was totally ignored. Simultaneously in 1979, while Afghanistan was the focal point of the US-Soviet rivalry, Pakistan's other Western neighbor, Iran, underwent a seismic shift. The Islamic Revolution overthrew the pro-Western Shah, replacing a secular monarchy with a Shia theocracy under Ayatollah Khomeini. This not only challenged US influence in the region, but also inspired Islamist movements globally. Despite these regional upheavals, the US chose to disengage after achieving its objective in Afghanistan, while leaving Pakistan to face the consequences alone. As a frontline ally, Pakistan paid a steep price. The influx of weapons introducing the Kalashnikov culture, fueling violent crime, tribal feuds, sectarian strife, and political militancy. The narcotics crisis intensified as opium production in wartime Afghanistan surged. Pakistan, positioned as a transit route, saw a boom in drug trafficking, particularly heroin, further destabilizing society. Moreover, by the late 1980s, over 3 million Afghan refugees had entered Pakistan, overwhelming its already fragile infrastructure, economy, and public services. Moreover, this population included both suffering Afghan civilians and frustrated youth vulnerable to extremism. These burdens persist even today, a legacy of a war which Pakistan didn't start, but got involved in at America's behest.
So over the years, Pakistan has become home to millions of Afghans, 3.7 million before this recent deportation drive.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's tribal belt turned into a base for training Afghan fighters and incubating extremist ideologies. The number of madaris soared from around 2,500 to over 30,000, funded largely by foreign donations. And subsequently, these war-ravaged Afghan youth flocked to these madaris en masse,
which in turn produced indoctrinated, battle-hardened militants consumed by violence who later unleashed a global wave of terrorism. The ideological fallout was deep. The Afghan Jihad became a rallying point for global Islamist militancy, inspiring a generation of fighters who would later redirect their energies toward internal conflict.
This was the same Pakistan whose steadfast support enabled the US to defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan, a victory that triggered the collapse of USSR and led to the liberation of Eastern Europe and Central Asian states. On the other hand, this fall of communism in the region, with Pakistan's support, brought down the Berlin Wall and the notorious Iron Curtain. Also, Europe was reunited, freed from the looming threat of communism, all because Pakistan stood at the front lines while shaping history. Despite all the problems and betrayal to deal with, Pakistan sided with and became part of the US-led coalition in Gulf War 1.0, while also deploying around 10,000 troops in Saudi Arabia when the US needed it. Yet in a stunning reversal, Washington imposed sanctions under the Pressler Amendment, cutting off military aid and freezing Pakistan's already paid for F-16s.
Unfortunately, we see the Pressler Amendment as an obstacle in the way of non-proliferation. Pakistan and the United States have worked closely together in the past, and we're working closely together in peacekeeping even today.
Not only sidelining a key ally, but punishing it, perhaps for helping it defeat communism. Meanwhile, the absence of a stabilizing power in post-war Afghanistan triggered a brutal civil war. The chaos paved the way for the rise of religious militancy, including the emergence of Taliban 1.0 and the proliferation of various jihadist factions. By 1994, the Taliban had seized power in parts of Afghanistan, offering promises of order and Islamic governance. While the US and its allies officially withheld recognition, US intelligence covertly engaged with the Taliban until at least 1998. As confirmed in 2000 congressional hearings, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher stated this administration has a covert policy that has empowered the Taliban and enabled this brutal movement to hold on to power.
During the Reagan years, we provided a great deal of support for those insurgents, and they ultimately pushed the Soviets out.
In 1998, after Pakistan responded to its arch enemy India's nuclear tests, with tests of its own, the US imposed harsh sanctions under the Symington and Glenn amendments, further straining Pakistan's economy, despite the fact it was the same India which had dismembered Pakistan. Adding salt to injury, India faced no comparable pressure, highlighting the West's double standards and leaving Pakistan doubly assailed.
I have made it clear to the leaders of Pakistan that we have no choice but to impose sanctions pursuant to the Glenn Amendment, as is required by law.
Externally, Pakistan faced sanctions, and internally, owing to the abrupt end of the anti-Soviet jihad, Pakistan was in total chaos and disarray. Unchecked militancy, radicalized fighters, a flood of weapons and extremist ideologies that rapidly took root within the country's social and political fabric. Ultimately, Pakistan's greatest burden was not economic or military, but strategic abandonment by its Western allies. Left to deal with the wreckage of a war it did not begin, Pakistan entered a prolonged era of radicalization, institutional decay, and internal fragmentation, a direct result of being deserted at the moment of greatest need. Among all this came the tragic 9/11 attacks, which reshaped global geopolitics. In October 2001, the US launched Operational Enduring Freedom to dismantle the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
A mission impossible without Pakistan's cooperation. Yet, instead of diplomatic outreach, the US issued an ultimatum. You are either with us or against us.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Despite the tone, Pakistan stood by its former ally once again, providing vital intelligence, logistics, and access for the war on terror.
Friendship between the United States and Pakistan is vital to the security and stability of South Asia.
On the other hand, Pakistan saw it as the moment to root out extremism. It chose peace over passivity and progress over fear. President Musharraf launched the ambitious, enlightened moderation to rescue Pakistan from extremism and reclaim its true progressive identity. Bold reforms followed, $100 million allocated for the Madrasa Reform Plan, including introduction of secular subjects. Media was liberalized, women's rights advanced through reserved seats, and minority inclusion strengthened by abolishing the separate electorate. In a conservative society, this was nothing short of defiance, but done only as we were serious to root out terrorism. On the military front, Pakistan did even more. Not only did Pakistan outlaw terror groups like Al-Qaeda and affiliates, but in just a few years, despite social, economic and political strains, it raised the troops level in the tribal belt from 50,000 to nearly 150,000. To fully dismantle terror infrastructure in a war it didn't start. As a result, attacks on soldiers rose from 1 in 2001 to 98 by 2010. The economy suffered, cities bled, and even Musharraf narrowly survived multiple assassination attempts. Yet, Pakistan stood firm. As President Bush then acknowledged, Pakistan's efforts against terror are benefiting the world and linking it more closely with the world. In recognition, the US designated Pakistan a major non-NATO ally.
We will also be making a notification to our Congress that will designate Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally.
Pakistan established a secure logistics corridor for NATO forces and committed significant resources to protect it. More importantly, US counter-terrorism successes relied heavily on Pakistan's intelligence support, which led to the capture or elimination of numerous high-value militants. However, as the Afghan war dragged on, US trust eroded. Covert drone strikes in Pakistan's tribal areas intensified, often violating sovereignty and causing civilian casualties. Cross-border incidents between NATO and Pakistani forces leading to periodic breakdowns in military cooperation. Pakistan's alliance with the US increasingly came at a steep political and socio-economic cost. Perhaps the greatest burden was the influx of radical militants who went on to wreak havoc not only in Pakistan but across the world. Meanwhile, India exploited the regional instability to wage a proxy war against Pakistan. It is now well established that India, through its embassy and consulates in Afghanistan, supported the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, a conglomerate of militant groups formed in 2007, supplying funding and encouragement for attacks across Pakistan, including on civilians, soldiers, and school children as well. As Pakistan fought extremism head-on, its eastern neighbor India had other plans. India openly funded, armed and supported extremist groups to destabilize and fragment Pakistan, just as it did in 1971, when it backed the separatist movement that tore the country into half.
India had torn up Pakistan once in 1971. So India has the capability to again tear is Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Unabashedly emboldened by deepening US support, India made no effort to conceal its nefarious designs. Its present National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, openly bragged about sabotaging Pakistan's counter-terrorism efforts under a strategy he called offensive defense.
Pakistan's vulnerability is many times higher than of India. Once they know that India has shifted its gear from the defensive mode to defensive offense, they will find that it is unaffordable for them. You can do one Mumbai, you may lose Balochistan.
That wasn't mere rhetoric. Pakistan later arrested Kulbhushan Yadav, a serving Indian naval officer, caught working with separatists and extremists to spread chaos in Balochistan and erstwhile tribal areas of Pakistan. In response, Pakistan's military launched multiple counter-terrorism operations to clear the tribal areas of these India-backed insurgents. Thousands of Pakistani soldiers and civilians laid down their lives in this fight, a grim but resolute stand against imported terrorism. On the other hand, despite limited resources, Pakistan launched one of the region's most ambitious de-radicalization and reintegration initiatives, focusing on political, social, economic, and infrastructural reforms, particularly in the tribal area bordering Afghanistan called FATA. Under the National Finance Commission Award, 1% of national resources were allocated to uplift 8 militancy-hit districts. Pakistan also passed the 25th constitutional amendment to merge the former FATA into the national mainstream, despite resistance from conservative factions. By 2024, 95% of displaced families, 52,752, had been resettled, 1,618 development projects launched, 923 completed, and 4,977 local representatives elected to 711 newly established village councils. Security efforts included regularizing 29,000 personnel and raising 100 new wings of the Frontier Corps, while cutting on budgets from several other extremely important projects. FATA now has 5,572 state-run schools, more than Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad totaled. Simultaneously, Pakistan countered extremist ideology through its Paigam-e-Pakistan campaign, where over 4,000 religious scholars from all sects denounced terrorism as un-Islamic. Given Pakistan's financial situation, even Dawn, the country's leading newspaper, described the effort as too ambitious. Yet Pakistan chose not to bow before terrorism. Pakistan's alliance with the US post 9/11 came at a heavy price. The conflict destabilized regions like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as military operations and drone strikes fueled resentment, displacement, and introduced suicide bombings, a previously unknown phenomenon. The war drained Pakistan's economy, deterred foreign investment, and deepened societal polarization and radicalization. Despite immense sacrifices, Pakistan faced blame more than recognition, leaving behind strategic mistrust, insecurity, and national trauma. As Hillary Clinton noted in 2011, we need Pakistan to be our partner in fighting terrorism, but they must demonstrate that they are serious about rooting out extremists.
For reconciliation to succeed, Pakistan must be a part of that process.
In 2021, the US again withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving Pakistan to manage the fallout in a volatile region. Hillary Clinton's haunting words about betrayal after the Soviet withdrawal echoed deeply in the hearts of every Pakistani once more. It was a feeling of déjà vu.
We also have a history of kind of moving in and out of Pakistan. I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work. And it was President Reagan, in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam, so that we can go beat the Soviet Union. And guess what? They retreated, they lost billions of dollars, and it led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there's a very strong argument, which is, it wasn't a bad investment to end the Soviet Union, but let's be careful what we sow, because we will harvest. So we then left Pakistan. We said, okay, fine, you deal with the stingers that we've left all over your country. You deal with the mines that are along the border. And by the way, we don't want to have anything to do with you. In fact, we're sanctioning you. So we stopped dealing with the Pakistani military and with ISI, and we now are making up for a lot of lost time.
Despite policy differences, Pakistan actively facilitated America's rushed exit, ensuring a relatively smooth evacuation.
If we can work with a new Afghan government in a way that helps secure those interests, we will do it.
This withdrawal echoed the 1989 exit after the Soviet War. Both left Afghanistan unstable and Pakistan exposed to militant spillover. Taliban 2.0 quickly seized power, toppling the Ashraf Ghani government with little resistance. The Afghan army, despite years of US support, collapsed or surrendered, and the Taliban reinstated a hardline regime similar to their 1996 to 2001 rule. The new Taliban government began harboring anti-Pakistan factions like the TTP and Baloch separatists, emboldening cross-border terrorism and destabilizing Pakistan. Attacks on civilians, military targets, and infrastructure surged, straining Pakistan's security and economy. Despite this, the US continued sending $40 million weekly humanitarian aid to Afghanistan, though intended for relief, much of it indirectly powered anti-Pakistan groups. Additionally, the US left behind billions in advanced weaponry, now used by Taliban-aligned militants in Pakistan. In short, Pakistan's disposition and later alliance with the Free West and the US in the war on terror has cost over 90,000 lives and more than $600 billion in economic losses, $152 billion in direct losses, and more than $450 billion in indirect damage. Yet, instead of being recognized as a victim, Pakistan is vilified and branded as a sponsor of terrorism, while its sacrifices are totally ignored and the Indian narratives blindly accepted. The US, once a close ally, now imposes sanctions and turns its back. Its disastrous Afghan legacy lives on in Pakistan in the form of violence, division, and fear. Despite standing by America time and again, Pakistan has reaped only extremism, mistrust, and betrayal. Many now ask, what has the US ever given us but abandonment at every critical moment? This one-sided relationship has brought only chaos and loss. It is clear terrorism was a product of the US's geopolitical goals. Today, India, emboldened by friendly Washington, roams free, playing the nasty proxy wars in the region. Yet Pakistan is branded and mocked as the epicenter of terrorism. Let not dominant narratives blur the truth. What more could a struggling Pakistan have done to protect the world from violent extremism? Let your conscience decide who truly suffered and who walked away with the gains.